Railway Conversations with Doc Frank.
Hello and welcome back to the show. My guest today is Louise Hart. This is the second part of a three-part conversation that I had with her. And if you are interested in procurement of major projects, then you will really love this episode, this conversation that I had with Louise. Please enjoy after a short word from our sponsor. Hi, this is Doc Frank, and before we get into the podcast, I want to quickly tell you about ONO, O-N-O. In case you don't know what it means, here in Australia it means or nearest offer, and that means that a price for a certain thing is negotiable. So how does it work and how may that be of interest to you? If you're interested in training or education on advanced modern signaling or the capacity increase of railways, then please do step 1 up here and check out my training portal docfranktraining.podia.com. You will find a globally unique collection of training offers that you can't find anywhere else. If you do, let me know. I'm always happy to learn. There are courses about the blueprint for high capacity signaling, the mindset for high capacity railways, and of course the flagship CBTC training that has been the longest running CBTC training in the world, even though it's been regularly updated. If you have found anything that's of interest to you, then we come to step number 2. You look at the regular price. If you think that's fair, that's good, then just procure the training and enjoy. I'm happy with that. If you want to save a few bucks, then send me an email to training@docfrank.com.au. And in that email, let me know which training or conference recording you are interested in and what is the price that you want to pay for it. And if I consider your offer reasonable, if it makes sense for me, I will accept it. Otherwise, I will let you know, and maybe we have a little negotiation along the way as well. And then you have the opportunity to enjoy world-class training on signaling at prices that are below the nominal package. So I think it's a good offer. It won't last forever. The current intent is to keep it running to the end of this calendar year, 2024. So don't wait to the last minute. Check out my training portal. And if you find something, then send me an email and let's negotiate. But now, please enjoy the upcoming podcast episode. What you said in the book very early in the introduction section is that the root of failure in mega projects is very often in the procurement phase. And this is something that meets my own experience and also what I've seen elsewhere, that most of the foundations of things going wrong or things going right are really set in the early stages of the project, the planning and then the procurement. How often have you seen that a procurement plan seemed to be good, but then people deviated from it, like the railways deviated from their own procurement plans for, I don't know, for whatever reasons, with an outcome that was definitely worse than if they had stuck to the original plan?
Look, I think a lot of what goes wrong is actually not doing enough of the planning up front. There's always a lot of pressure, particularly politically, to get moving, to have something going, to show it happening. And, one of the clever things that Sydney Metro did on the Northwest Link, the first one they built, was to separate out the tunneling contract from everything else. Now, partly that was because tunneling is a separate expertise anyway, but it was also because it was self-contained and they could let that contract relatively quickly and safely and literally get the tunnel boring machines in the ground before the election. And that gave them the time to develop the main contract and planning for the railway they were then going to build through the tunnel. And by being able to show something happening politically, they took the heat off themselves for proceeding with the procurement of the remaining contracts. And I think that was very helpful to them, because I think urgency, a sense of urgency, can really destroy projects, procurement processes, whatever. As soon as people get the idea in their heads that urgency is all that matters, it usually ends up costing more time than it saves.
Yeah, I don't think urgency as such is an issue. If urgency turns into a haste, that's the real problem. Yeah, if you don't do things properly, if you basically cut corners in order to squeeze a timeline that you would need to do things properly, that's really where the problem is, I believe.
Yeah. Well, people do have very unrealistic ideas. When we did the Waratah contract, I remember I was brought in as project director, and I turned up in April 2004 and was told that I had to issue the request for expressions of interest by the end of May. And this was a completely and utterly hopeless timetable. But I couldn't actually say no entirely. So what I did was invent what I called a registration of interest process, whereby just invited everybody in New South Wales, basically, who had anything to do with trains to express an interest. And we set up a little sort of seminar where the potential bidders turned up and people who might be able to do, supply bits of the train to the eventual tenderers. And, the Premier turned up and we had a nice little session. But the only reason for doing that was to give the politicians a view that something was happening. I'd met their demand to get something out into the public domain by the end of May. And then we quietly went away and produced a proper expression of interest, which went out, I think, at the end of August. And that additional time, we were able to do, I think, a pretty good job on it. But if you don't realize what a disaster the speed is, someone else might have said, okay, the politicians have said we've got to go out by the end of May, we'll produce something and get it out there. But it almost certainly would have been substandard and poorly planned. And it's that kind of thing at the start of a process that just cruels things for you later.
Mm. I wonder what your preference is. Very often you hear that you need a different characters of people for different stages of a project. And you may argue that the procurement stage is quite a bit different from the project delivery stage and the planning, say planning and procurement, if I can just combine those two. So basically everything until contract award and then everything after contract award, which is the delivery of the project. Do you have a preference from your experience on having different people, say different project directors for the planning and procurement versus the delivery? Or do you have a preference of the person seeing the whole thing through because that, I don't know, motivates them best to do planning and procurement in a way that they remain responsible for delivering, basically sorting out their own mess?
Yeah, I've always liked the way we did it on the Waratah contract, which was that I was project director for the procurement phase, and particularly with my legal background, that was really helpful getting the governance across the procurement right, getting the contract details right. But still at the beginning of that phase, I appointed a guy, Fred Patton, who started out being my deputy through that phase, but he's an engineering background. And the expectation was always that once we'd signed the contracts, he would take over and manage the actual delivery. And that worked really well because, as I say, with my background, doing the procurement phase was absolutely right, but I would have struggled very much in the delivery phase because I don't actually know enough about trains and the details of manufacturing and all that kind of thing that you really need to be able to supervise someone else who's doing it. But having Fred on board during the procurement process meant that there was a sort of fairly constant creative tension with me wanting to do things and Fred being conscious that he was actually going to have to administer this contract that I was preparing for him. And that gave us a really good sort of creative tension. And I think we got a very good contract out of it as a result. But I do think that there are different skill sets. Some people can do it all the way through from procurement to delivery, and they like to do that. But I've always been keen on the setup phase, the getting to what I call the point of mutual optimism when you all get around a table and sign the contract. And at that moment, everyone thinks it's all going to be wonderful. And, sometimes that lasts a while, sometimes it fades after about 10 seconds, but I love that moment when everyone signs up and yes, it's going to happen.
Your book has been out now for, you said about 10 years or so?
Yeah, published in 2015.
Right. Um, I wonder what kind of feedback you got from the industry, especially in your area of activity. Do you think it has changed something for the better? I'm not sure whether you can say it changed much for the better. So what I'm really getting at, I'm beating around the bush a bit. If you compare the quality of procurement processes in Australia today compared to 10 years ago or 12 years ago when you wrote your book and published your book, do you see an improvement, or do you think it has gone downhill despite of your book because of I don't know, external influences? People are more under time pressure than before, something like that. So before and after, how would you see that?
Look, I don't think the book itself had that much of an impact. I got some very good feedback from some of the individuals who read it and made use of it. But it was never a bestseller. And I was always a bit annoyed with the publisher who priced it as a textbook, with the result that many of the people that I've had discussions with about it over the years have actually been PhD students. And, all power to PhD students, but actually it's a book for practitioners. And that's actually why this year I've taken to LinkedIn and have been putting out a post every weekday with just a little bite-sized chunk, often from the book, sometimes stuff that's happened since then. Because I think what I found was that most people are just not able to take in something as chunky as the book. They need to have it presented to them in bite-sized chunks, preferably at the moment where they need that particular bit of wisdom. I think generally procurement processes have been improving, but I always see an issue in that a lot of the efforts made to improve procurement processes have been about procurement in an organization generally. And that means a sort of one size fits all approach, which doesn't always work for a mega project. Things like you have to have 3 quotes. Well, actually, mega project, 2 bidders going head to head will probably give you the best pricing you're ever going to get. Sometimes you do need a third, but actually the presence of the third often makes the other two think, well, is there going to be another round of bidding? Should I have, it's there are things that are different about mega projects. But I
Yeah,
think government agencies have, on the whole, been making real efforts to improve their procurement.
what I've seen often in these cases is really a two-stage procurement process where firstly you try to distill down the whatever number of tenders you've got down to 2, and then have a final shortlist and some kind of early contractor involvement or so, where you basically make up your mind between those two to pick the final one. So I mean, in that case, you could just start with 2 straight away, or it wouldn't damage too much if you have 2, as long as those 2 obviously are capable of doing the job and doing the work. Um, with regards to the bite size presentation of things, and I was just thinking to myself, ideally you've got some kind of a little dance routine with it, yeah, which will help a bit on some social media platforms. Um, at the end of your book, there was a couple of pages, literally just I think you called it final thoughts, if I'm not mistaken. But what it ended up being is a top 10 list of your lessons learned, um,
Yeah.
which I would like to go through with you, because hopefully that gives some kind of, not just a summary of some of the key essential items of the book, but also do it like a little bit in a condensed format where people say, oh well, that sounds all very commonsensical. Maybe I should have a look at the entire book, especially if it comes out in paperback and becomes more affordable. So item number 1 on that top 10 list was be clear on the objectives. I just let you comment on that a little bit, as much as you want.
Yeah, I think it's simply that once you start one of these things, they get an enormous weight behind them, and it's very easy to get sucked in and forgetting why you did things in the first place. Suddenly it's apparently become important to have a new building. Well, you didn't start out for a new building; you wanted to fix something else, and if you don't keep track of the objectives, you really can end up spending a lot of money not getting to where you wanted to be in the first place. And it's also often the case that the politicians particularly don't actually know what the real objective of the project should be. They sort of think, the railway's in a mess, I need to do something big to fix it. Here's something big, do that. And you get handed stuff like that, and you've got to try and actually pin that down to sensible objectives that a project manager can work towards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a good example there, I believe, is everything to do with the rollout of ETCS, the European Train Control System in Sydney, which was the business case that we looked at, because a main objective there was to create an environment with more than one supplier, that so multiple suppliers, at least 2, which are interoperable with each other, because interoperability is a key hallmark feature of ETCS, but it doesn't fall off a tree. You don't get it by default. And if you only have a single contractor, who should they be interoperable with? Yeah, and then if you try to introduce a second supplier much later in the piece, you often find that the compatibility between the first supplier and the second coming in isn't that great. So what they did in the project that we worked on is they said from the start, we want to start with 2 suppliers. And in order for both suppliers to have skin in the game, we want to start with 2 projects, not just one, with 2 projects. So our early deployment schemes are actually 2 of them running in parallel. And that's a procurement approach which I think is quite unusual for most railways, but I found it extremely helpful for actually achieving this objective. And I was extremely pleased to see that they actually stuck with that approach. They actually saw it all the way through, even though I'm pretty certain there will have been external influences during the time saying, why do you go for two projects? Just put it together, just do one. Yeah, why do you want to go with two contractors? Just go with one, as we have always done it. But that would have led to results as they have always got, which is not interoperable. Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's a good example of.
And that's a classic. That's a classic of a mega project demanding a bespoke approach. You still have the same procurement principles about fairness and all the rest, and you don't want to throw any of that out the window. But the specifics of a mega project, you need to, you know, you'll probably need to do something a bit special.
Yeah. Number 2 on the list. That may come down quite controversial with some people. Leave your brain switched on.
Yeah, I think what I meant there was really that there is always so much happening on a mega project, any project really, that you spend your whole time firefighting. And you really need to have a little piece of your brain that can stay connected, but looking over and saying, yeah, that may be your crisis today, but actually, is the whole project where it needs to be? Should you really be dealing with this crisis, or should you hand that off to someone else and deal with this other problem? And I think it's that ability to step back and just keep that bit of your mind open to what's the overall situation, not what's top of my inbox.
Yeah, yeah. And you explained it well. You mentioned the word detachment in the brief explanation of that point. So it's, as you said, taking a step back and say, well, wait a minute, let's have a look at the bigger picture here, and whether I'm still climbing up the right tree here, or whether I'm in the wrong forest altogether. So to me, I basically read it more like, keep your head above water and don't get swamped with the day-to-day business, rather than switching your brain on, because people will argue, well, I've got my brain switched on every day, but the problem is all the overwhelm that I'm getting. Yeah. Number 3, and that's an interesting thing. We can probably talk 2 days just about this one. Find the best people.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's easy to say, hard to do, but it really, really makes a difference to a project as to whether you're doing it with people who are capable in their field, who can run with things, who can spot the problems coming and deal with them before they arrive. And you know, as project director, you can't do it all. And even if you were technically capable of doing it all, which I don't know that anybody is, you wouldn't have the time to do it all. So it's absolutely critical that you've got people who can be trusted to get on with it in their own areas and coordinate with everyone else. And, you know, it's easy to say, hard to do, but there is no substitute for doing a project with really first-class people.
I think one of the workarounds, I mean, you did a recent post and you didn't really want to discuss too much about this in this podcast when we spoke before, which was about this recruitment thing and to what degree government railways can really afford the best people in the industry, because they normally work on quite different salary levels. If we say we independent contractors or consultants or something like that, they basically work on a different salary level because they need to take care of situations where they may not have worked for 6 months, a year, or even longer than that. What I found may be a suitable workaround, and I wanted to have your view on that, is to bring somebody in as an advisor part-time, who is willing to basically share their knowledge with the client team that's already there, which can pick up or suck up that knowledge and then run with it. And even though that external advisor or guide, mentor, whatever you want to call it, may be expensive in itself, by having this person not full-time on the payroll but only get them in as required, it may become a kind of affordable solution. And by doing that, a client organization may be more able to pay market rates for the kind of expertise they're seeking, and still have an affordable solution. I'm not sure what your view on that is.
Look, I think that's a very sensible approach, and it's one I've used from time to time. When you've got areas where, you just can't have somebody full time, some getting in the well, they've usually got grey hair, not always, but it does. Someone who's been there, done that, got the T-shirt, and can really just give that extra dimension to things. Yes, I think that's often a really useful thing to do. Someone who is independent, but knowledgeable.
Hi again, I hope you enjoyed the second part of my 3-part conversation with Louise Hart. If you have missed part 1, not a problem, go back to episode number 92 and watch that one. And also make sure by subscribing to the show that you don't miss the 3rd part of the conversation, which will come in the next episode, number 94. Thank you for listening and have a good day.